Cameron Amnesty just published this new chapbook. How are you, she innocently asked. And it's just the prettiest thing I've ever seen. I like some of the work inside, but so you should buy those. There's copies. And thank you very much, Stuart. That was very kind. Big. A strange thing happened when you were in the womb. No one knows what it was. But at age 15, you were 9'8" and in perfect proportion. You have the coordination of a gymnast and the speed of a racehorse. You go to the Olympics and win every event you can enter. You win all of the races, the sprints, long distance, relays. You throw the discus, javelin, hammer, and shot out of the stadium. You break every record of every race ever run. But you were still growing. By the time you were 20, you were 11 foot tall. You were generally polite, but beginning to feel that no one understands you, and you were right. You are not only big and strong, you've got a big brain that works, and it is working all the time. So you quit sport and become a politician. You are a giant among men and without equal. By the time you take office, you are almost 14 feet tall. New buildings have to be built to accommodate you. But your big brain is patient. You start with small changes, like ripping the heads off of small dictators, sending video of it to larger dictators. You make your intentions clear. Wealth is to be shared, healthcare given to all on earth. You ban all weapons and fighting. As you near 15 feet, you wear shoes the size of small canoes, and when you laugh, it can be heard for miles. You are human, but some think you a god, a benevolent father figure. You prove yourself human by being too kind to be a god. You ask for no sacrifice except the sacrifice you make. Years pass and utopia approaches. There is peace and plenty on earth. You cure disease through research. Education becomes more popular than fast food, and fast food disappears. Because of your size, there is no woman for you. You live a long, tall time, and the world prospers. When you die, it is the saddest day ever. You are buried in the biggest coffin. It is carried by 20 men, and they are all in tears. Your normal-sized parents are long gone. You had no siblings. But life goes on perfectly because you've shown the way, set that big example, opened our big hearts. Buddy and the Bridge. I always hated buying drugs from Buddy. There were all the rules that he had and insisted upon. Most of them made sense, but it was still a drag after all these years. The worst part about going to see him was that you could never just go in and out, dine and dash. You always had to sit down and talk to him as though he had something interesting to say. Every once in a while he did, but usually it was the same old story, told in the same old way, using the same old words, because Buddy was a creature of habit. The one story he told that completely caught my interest was the time he got stung in the ass by a wasp when he was working construction. It was right after high school, and his mother had gotten him a job working with a small crew who built bridges. Buddy had no skills, but his mother knew the mother of the foreman, and that was that. His first day on the job, he spent digging a ditch and growing blisters. His hands were so soft that his skin gave up a couple of hours into the day. By noon, his hands were bleeding. Of course, his boss expected him to leave and never come back. Buddy is a bit of an ass, but he was made out of stronger stuff. He went back the next day and the next and so on. After a couple of weeks, the crew accepted him, and to this day, Buddy talks with some affection about that job. The day he was stung is another matter. The bridge was almost finished, and Buddy was grinding sidewalks. You use a large, smooth stone on a rotor attached to a motor. It looks something like a giant electric toothbrush. As Buddy was grinding the edge off of the sidewalk the crew had laid the day before, he was thinking about what a beautiful day it was. The summer had been almost perfect. The bridge was being built over a small canal, and the setting was all green woods, blue water, blue sky. Buddy was thinking about what a beautiful day it was, and how much he was going to enjoy seeing Janet, his girlfriend, at the end of it. They had just started to have sex. Buddy was thinking about that when the wasp or hornet or whatever bug from Beelzebub it was that stung him just above the belt, just above the crack of his ass. Buddy stood straight up, and when he did, he brought the grinding, rotating stone right into his shin. It didn't stop grinding all at once. Buddy didn't really notice the stone grinding into his shin because the insect that had just sent a flamethrower through his ass was now actually down between his butt cheeks. When he'd stood up, the wasp went down. What all the workers saw was Buddy jumping up and down on the side of the bridge trying to take off his pants while hopping on one leg and screaming bloody blue murder and fuck goddamn shit bastard son of a bitch. They didn't know about the bug. After all the laughter, his boss took him to the emergency ward to get his shin looked after. There wasn't much they could do about the stinging, and he was off work for a while. The way Buddy described it, I had 3 ass cheeks for 2 weeks. It still makes me laugh out loud. Slapstick. I'd been working at Ford for about 2 weeks, building engines and sweating my ass off, when Rico asked me to meet him at lunch. We were sitting in the cafeteria and he came out with it. He could only date his girlfriend if his girlfriend had a chaperone. Well, this was 1977 and a mystery to me. He was asking me to accompany the chaperone, who turned out to be his girlfriend's second cousin. We went to the Holiday Inn in Windsor. Back then, it had a theater, and we saw the Paul Newman movie Slapstick. Afterwards, we went for burgers and then to a dark country road. Rico and his gal in the front of the 2-door car, while the chaperone and I filled up the rear. As soon as the car quit moving, Rico and his partner vanished under the shadow of the front seat. Cars bigger back then, and many had large bench seats. Sounds ensued, and the seconds ticked by like dark, ominous things. My date was nice enough, but not someone I wanted to kiss. Certainly no one I wanted to embrace. But there we were in the back seat of a 2-door car, Rico and company beyond reach, the sounds they were making clearly meaning they were beyond conversation. As the centuries rolled in through the windows and into the back seat and me, the chaperone moved in closer and I was caught. Anything other than a kiss was going to be rude. I leaned in to meet her and the kissing started. It was better than I expected, but still not what I wanted. It was better than sitting at home in my empty apartment and waiting for the world to start. At around 1 a.m., I discovered that my chaperone had beautiful breasts, but to my equal shock and surprise, she had a thick patch of black hair between them. I'd not only never encountered such a thing, I'd never imagined it. Part of me, an internal part, recoiled in terror, but Effie's son was taught to be polite. We continued with the kissing thing and others until we expired the limitations of a back seat and a first date. The next day, Rico and his girlfriend and the chaperone arrived at my door early. They were going to an amusement park where there were rides of every shape and size. I knew it angered all of them, but I'd already had my ride and the amusement had worn off. I also knew it did not make me appear to be kind or chivalrous. It was a hot Sunday morning in the Windsor of my youth. I'd gone out the night before as a favor to Rico. I'd kissed the girl because there was no other way to go. But a kiss is not a promise, and when they left, I went back to bed and then back to sleep. Monday was coming, and that motor line waited for no one. On the porch. Somewhere, the sound of a piano. An elderly couple sit on their porch holding hands and remembering their first kiss, the time their youngest broke his wrist. They listen to the piano and talk their history. The man talks of his first carbonated, of the days immediately after the war. She, being a little younger, talks of her first dance and then the sight of the boys coming home. Neither of them talk of the dead, knowing full well they will know what the dead know soon. He tells her, hand in hand, how grand it has been to be her friend all these years. She says, "Yes, I know, dear. I love you too." They listen to the piano as the song slowly turns to night. In this and many other things, her perfume set the dogs barking. Actually, it was the sound of a bottle breaking on the hardwood floor. He'd knocked it over getting out of bed. Jimmy was trying to leave the scene of the crime without being detected. He'd waited until he was sure she was sleeping deeply. He could tell by the rhythm of her breath that, and she was snoring. The evening had started out well enough. Jimmy ran into Sarah at a bar he sometimes frequented. Okay, it was a bar he frequently frequented. Jimmy was a drinker, and he liked to think he was a ladies' man as well. In this and many other things, Jimmy was deluded. He went through his usual ablutions before heading out earlier that night. Shower, clean shave, cologne, baby powder. All of this while listening to his favorite music. Willie Nelson cried a long-haired bawl while Jimmy combed his hair. He liked to keep it parted from the right because he thought that made him look more like Johnny Cash. In truth, there was no resemblance. Jimmy drove an old black Camaro, but he kept it in shape. It shone. The interior was red leather. Caring about his car as he didn't trust himself to look after the engine. In this one regard, Jimmy showed some common sense. Usually, it eluded him. Walking out on a sleeping woman was something Jimmy thought made him cool. Of course, he was operating on a narrow platform of comparison. This woman was his third sexual partner. Jimmy was 29 and lived in the apartment his father had built in the basement when he realized that his useless son was never leaving home. Jimmy's father figured that if he put him in the basement, at least he could watch the bad television he wanted. When James, Jimmy's father, died on the couch while watching a rerun of All in the Family, Jimmy inherited the color TV and everything else in the house. Jimmy's mother had been dead since he was 6. Aside from the Camaro, the only thing Jimmy really liked was to play hockey. He could hardly skate. Sarah had left home thinking that regardless of what happened tonight, she was going to fuck someone. She was hoping for someone wonderful, someone who could blot out the last 13 months' hell. She was going to settle for anything that would take the bad taste out of her mouth. Sarah and Tom had been together for 13 months when she finally figured it out. He lived in another town and with another woman. It had taken her that long to put the pieces together because Tom had his act down solid. His job demanded a particular type of travel and he took advantage of it. He did have a wife at home and a girlfriend in every town his firm had an office. He loved his life. When Sarah finally caught on that Tom was cheating, she caught Tom with a right just over his left eye. She broke her baby finger on the upper shelf of Tom's orbital lobe. Tom dropped like he'd been hit with a hammer. All of this took place at Sarah's front door about 2 hours before she met Jimmy. That calamity was a future event. When she punched Tom, Tom had arrived in a cab. The driver was still sitting at the end of the sidewalk when he saw Sarah open the door and throw a fist into Tom's head that dropped him like a rock. His knees folded as though cut with a scythe. He fell into the roses, kissed by all those thorns. Sarah pulled the door shut behind her and locked it, stepped over her fallen ex as though he were something a dog had left on the walk. She walked the 8 steps to the waiting cab. She gave the cabbie the name of the bar, walked in, and kick-started Jimmy's life. 4 hours later, she faked being drunk and faked being asleep. She regretted hitting Tom, but didn't regret hurting him. She regretted bringing Jimmy home, his skills as a lover only slightly better than his skills at everything else. He'd been a disappointment when almost nothing else had been required. What she really regretted was the broken bottle of At Last. It was the only expensive perfume she owned, but she wasn't going to wake up to protest, not when it sounded like he was leaving. She waited until she heard the puttering growl of the old black Camaro before she got up and wiped up the glass, soaked up the perfume, let the dogs out of the kitchen. Swimming to the bottom of the sea. Knowing how the world sees you and that there is always room for change, the years of your misery are years you won't get back. As a loved man, and deservedly so, your life should have more celebration in it. Loving someone means wanting to see them happy, helping to make it so. All those hours you spend so sad, all that time afraid. Love shouldn't lead to fear. Love isn't that. Ask the mother who loves her child, the cat who loves her kitten. You can only travel the road you were on for so long. The long black and blue arm of guilt has to be severed. Better to be a one-armed happy man with a chance at happiness than to sink beneath the waves, both arms flailing. Wow, I liked that a lot better before I read it. Small miracle. A harbor filled with ships and no one sailing anywhere. There had been a flash freeze sometime during the previous night. Now the harbor was black glass, as smooth as the surface of a mirror. Those who were awake were abnormally quiet. There was no sound of water lapping, waves waving, or anyone waxing eloquent. Instead, there was the whisper of voices traveling over glass. You knew it couldn't last, but nonetheless, it was spectacular. It was like the earth had gone to sleep for a moment and left us all in silence. Mothers stirred in their bed, did not rise. Children awoke, but did not cry out. Most peculiar in a harbor was the silence of birds. Usually as noisy as noise, there wasn't a sound. The wind blew small clouds of powdery snow like cotton candy sentinels against the wooden sides of the similarly silent ships. And then, from the east, the sun crested the hills that hid the harbor, and something no one had ever seen before, a horse, unexplainably loose, and walking slow-footed over the harbor and into the direction of the sea. "How are you?" she innocently asked. Another ache that's becoming a pain. I've been getting fairly regular headaches. It feels like a balloon full of hot air expanding endlessly. The balloon in question surfaced with crushed glass, and it's directly touching nerve. My nerves, all of them. My eyesight has abandoned me, although I'm told it is usual for someone my age. I need longer arms now to have a chance of reading. I wear a plastic strip at night across my nose. My wife insists. Several broken noses and one unsuccessful operation later, I apparently snore as though an invading horde had reached the gates. My chalky teeth ache, those I have left. They react to cold, heat, conversation, and sleep. If it weren't for chewing meat, I'd have them all removed. My heart beats like an old Harley, all boom, boom, boomity boom. Sometimes I listen to it in bed after my wife is asleep to try and take my mind off of the steady hum of tinnitus that lives in my ears and noggin. It started about 3 years ago and is only getting louder. I broke my right elbow 4 years ago. It was the second time. And now when I straighten it, it cracks like Babe's back. The internal electricity that runs through me and comes out my ass in a blue streak of lightning. I broke my right leg for the second time 3 months ago, and it's been pretty sore, but nothing like my left knee, which is awaiting surgery. I have apparently torn whatever it is I shouldn't. This is one of the weeks where my bowels bleed a bit. I have a somewhat nervous ulcer, and when stressed, the Coke I drink, the pot I smoke don't help enough. My feet are as wide as they are long. Officially, I wear a 6.5 quadruple E. I'm not kidding. Neither are the reluctant cobblers of the world. They are pretty sure I don't exist and refuse to make a shoe for me. Tore the end off of my right index finger last fall. It's mostly healed, but I am right-handed and have missed the missing piece. The line of stitches they used to reattach me to me has turned into a curious scar. Some people think I scowl a lot, not realizing I have a huge scar over my left eye and onto my forehead. I fractured my skull for the first time playing miniature golf. The second time involved a high diving board, serious miscalculations involving gravity, physics, first aid. When you mention a skull fracture, and it isn't your only one, it is indeed a bad conversation. I feel like that old car coughing its way into the junkyard, one irreparable part at a time. The crack on my windshield spreading like a spider's web in a room no one enters anymore. Stuart suggested I do something that he learned from David McFadden, and that is have people, instead of picking poems myself, have people give me a page number, and this book goes up to 130. So I'm going to take the first 5 numbers and read
112.
those. Sorry?
112.
Okay. Forgiveness. You want to forgive your father, but don't want the bother, don't want the work. You don't trust him, don't enjoy his company. He has never respected your wife, and that rips at what galls you. You spent your youth in confused idol worship, which he enjoyed, being the idol. But as a young adult, you began to see a larger picture. His absence revealed itself for what it truly was. You saw responsible adults acting so. When it was time to be friends, he was nowhere to be seen. Now, as you approach the sad side of middle age, he is nearing his last years, and you want to forgive your father. You want to forgive, but confuse that with forget. Then remember how he forgot all those birthdays, those Christmases, those Tuesdays, those Wednesdays. You remember his absent face, not at your graduation, not at your game. You remember the father and son nights where he was out of sight, his not being there, being your best memory of him, until now, when forgetting to forgive him and forgiving yourself is the best memory of all.
76.
My prime. That's funny. My prime. In San Francisco once again, I made the pilgrimage to city lights, Vesuvio's, bought my book, had a beer where Ginsberg sat. My books go unread, unpublished, unwritten. Whatever I thought I had to say gone, like my dark hair, my flat stomach. Another writer recently wrote that my prime was 20 years ago. A double surprise for me, not realizing I'd reached it, or that it had expired.
Yes.
Stars on the ceiling. I seem to be less all the time. I started out with something, but can't remember what it was. I can hear them, my poems, working away in the back of my skull like sirens, and that is what night has become. Sirens coming and going in the distance, none close enough to see. Two cats meet in a yard nearby. A dog smells them through a screen door. His bark echoes down the street as imagined stars arc slowly over the skyscape of my ceiling. Okay, two more.
27.
111.
There you go.
The poker game. It's been a year since I've talked to my father, and I don't expect to talk to him anytime soon. He's almost 70 and I'm almost 50. We are members of a fractured family. He left when I was 5 years old. We have that between us. He expects to be treated as the grand old patriarch, but he was never much of a father to me, then or now. So when he plays the family guilt card, I have no problem calling his bluff. And it has become that. I had hoped friendship was possible, but I'm still his child and therefore should be obedient, and it makes me laugh. Him betting the house on the cards in his hand, blind to my walking away from the game, the table, the past. Sounds like a theme. It's really not all about that anymore. Okay, 127. Boxing Day. Boxing Day required a short excursion to the local variety store, which is about 4 blocks from our door. In those 4 blocks, I saw 3 girls. It seemed that they were working. Our short street, an oasis in our part of town. We have a nice house and a nice garden. We are the lucky ones. Others are less so. Poverty, ignorance, and inheritance have sucked the hope out of some. That life is a losing struggle that most endure while the lucky few thrive seems obvious. It is a geographical border in most towns of the world, and ours is no different. One side of the tracks always downwind. At the corner store, Mikey's, one of the girls is struggling through her purchase. She's buying what I'd call penny candy, although I know nothing costs a penny anymore. The Iranian clerk, Shardad, has asked her to put a plastic bag over her hand as she reaches into the bins, and she does so knowing the obvious but unstated truths. It is a difficult transaction to witness. She is stoned to distraction and almost putrid with perfume, and the dull, stale stink of crack. It is a sad opera. And when she is finished and gone, Shardad apologizes to me. I tell him there is no reason. I pay for my loaf of bread. Out on the street, I see the candy girl saunter salaciously to her station on the corner. She looks me up and down as she pops a jawbreaker, eyes me to invite. I smile politely and continue on my Boxing Day way back to our quiet enclave, Nat King Cole on the box, crooning Quiet Christmas, lights twinkling on the tree. And just because the rest of it's been so cheery, my mother and I sat there and waited for death. My mother and I sat there waiting for death, both knowing it was coming. It was near. We both assumed he'd be coming for my mother, and we were right. We sat on the kitchen chairs my father had upholstered when my sister Judy was 3 years old, and watched as the arms of the clock chased each other around the dial, as the sun went round the earth, and the cat outside walked around the outside of the house in a feline orbit, secure in not knowing that death was waiting. My mother and I talked about death, and I know she hoped for heaven, but lacked the conviction of belief, and hence felt no solace. She didn't feel salvation was at hand, instead, just the dark she knew was coming. Most of her was tired and ready, and how sad is that for a young woman? As much as there is no heaven, there is no balance. Grief is not handed out equally. We do not all get the same number of sunny days. My mother was waiting for death because death was waiting for her. My mother understood that on that road, no turning back. She wasn't eager to meet death, but in the end couldn't come quickly enough. As the sun set, then rose, just like every other day, somewhere a cloud, somewhere rain, another place, flowers. Thank you very much.